Okay, aloha mai kako. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you so much to Alika and Ruben and Jonas and all the organizers and the MauiWES staff and volunteers. Let's see. We're going to talk a little bit about disaster recovery in the context of settler colonialism, because it's something that's not often spoken of in public spaces outside of Hawaiian spaces. And to me, as a Kanaka Maoli, it's important that other folks that are doing work in our community not only understand what this is, what it means, how it manifests, how it shows up, but what your particular role in that is, and whether or not you have some kuleana that you need to look at, adjust, ask questions about, learn more about. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that this morning. As you can see at the bottom, it says, "We are not American." We are not American. How many people in here how many people in here, raise of hand, know and understand that Hawaii is illegally occupied by the United States? Okay, hallelujah. Just a few who don't have that history yet. A few years ago, it was, like not that many people knew. Thank goodness the word's getting out. So let's see. I'm not that great with tech, so e kalamai if I get confused. Disaster relief on stolen land. Who's in charge? Anybody know the answer to that question? For us in our organization, and for my friends and family in Lahaina and in Kula, the people are in charge. Specifically, the people of that place. The people whose picos are buried in that aina. The people whose ancestors are buried in that aina for 1,000 years. Those voices must always be centered and must always come first. However, in the context of a settler government, like the United States belligerent military occupation, there's always a struggle. There's always going to be a struggle about whose voice is going to be centered. Is it going to be the government voice? Is it going to be the developers and the contractors and the corporations with big money who put those legislators in their seats? Who's going to have the say? And this is an ongoing question, and it's not like I'm going to tell you what the solution is today, but I just wanted to make sure you folks are aware of some things. So in 1893, there was an illegal coup by the sugar barons in Hawaii that wanted Hawaii to become part of the United States, and the US Navy backed that. There was never a treaty of annexation. This is all stuff you can look up, but I want to just give you a basic framework. What resulted in that is dispossession for Kanaka Maoli to this day, and forced assimilation, which is cultural genocide. The prolonged military occupation, and then of course, erasure and displacement. Settler colonialism's primary function is to take land for resource, destroy the culture that was there, and replace it in the settler's own image. This is just a little piece of the apology resolution that was passed by, or that was written by Bill Clinton in 1993, which was the 100-year anniversary of the illegal overthrow. And you can look this up. I just wanted to put it on the screen to give you the number. It's Bill 103-150. It's about 5 pages long, and it breaks down exactly what happened, starting with the recognition that Kanaka Maoli people were highly intelligent, highly organized, highly skilled, high-functioning society that functioned without intervention from Westerners until 1777. If you have never read this before, you should. Especially if you live here in Hawaii, you should understand this history. What this resolution did not do was provide any reconciliation, any land back, any sort of reparations. It just said, oops, we're sorry, and then walked away. What that left us with as Kanaka Maoli is several generations out now with disconnection from land for many of us, disconnection from ohana. There are now more Hawaiians that live outside of Hawaii than live in Hawaii. Inhibited healing, so we have these high incidence of rates that you all talked about yesterday, like diabetes and hypertension, obesity. Increased substance abuse, which we all know is a disease. It's often triggered by trauma and it's often used as a coping mechanism. Expanded incarceration. We have a very, very powerful school to prison pipeline here for brown kids. Mostly Kanaka Maoli and other Pacific Islanders, as well as Micronesians. And I bring all this up because when we're talking about disparities and we're talking about looking at all these folks on all these different registries that we're looking at, are we looking at the root cause of those disparities? And are we making appropriate changes in our systems and structures and even conversations in our home to address what those root causes are? Because oftentimes when I go to conferences, not so much here, but I hear people talk about, disenfranchised communities, or, they'll talk about people with the poor health outcomes and high rates of domestic violence. But it always sounds like, oh, those poor people, like they're just victims, and like it's not because of something that happened to them. That it's not because of something that other people are still benefiting from. And it's so important that we get to the root and not just treat the branch. Because until as a society, as a larger society, we confront imperialism, settler colonialism, racism, white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, we are not going to be able to dig ourselves out of this, not only in Hawaii, but the world over. Yes, settler colonialism is a structure. It's not an event. It's not something that happened 140 years ago. It's happening every single day. It influences our ability to live as ourselves in our homelands, and it diverts power away from the people with the actual kuleana to the place. And kuleana means responsibility. And in Hawaii, we have a concept called kuleana, and then we have kulana. Kuleana is what is your responsibility, and kulana is what is your role? Where is your place? What is your positionality? Are you the one who's supposed to be speaking, or are you the one who's supposed to be listening and centering somebody else? I wanted to go back to this structure, not an event, and it's happening now because I was recently at an event with Maui fire survivors. There was only a handful of Kanaka Maoli and other Pacific Islanders there. And I heard somebody say, this fire was the worst thing that's ever happened to our community, and probably nothing like this will ever happen again. And I kind of wanted to throw up a little bit. I'm sorry, but the level of disconnect from settlers who move here to our experience is so huge. We already had an apocalypse. We went from a population of 1 million people to 40,000 people. Every single Kanaka Maoli alive is a descendant of those 40,000 people that survived. And in that survival has been 140 years of struggle. So reframing this and understanding that for a native population, the same goes for the continent with the first people on the continent, or on Guahan, or in Puerto Rico, or any of the other places that the US is occupying, or any other foreign nation that they have quote unquote settled. Our ability to live as ourselves, just imagine doing an oli once in a while versus that's our way of life. Some of the younger generation are being raised up to know what it is to be Hawaiian, to speak Hawaiian, to have access to land, to grow food. My generation, that wasn't the case. I'm a diaspora Kanaka and I grew up on the continent. My father came from a generation they called the lost generation. Zero Hawaiian history. Didn't even know there was a kingdom. He's super American. We're working on it, but I don't know if we're ever going to quite, you know. Those things are ingrained though, but see, that's that deculturalization and denationalization is genocide. My father was robbed the wisdom of his ancestors and brainwashed with settler bullshit. Excuse my expression, but this is true for many of us and it hurts. It's deeply painful. And I bring this up not only to educate, but for folks to understand that when you're working with populations who have been through genocide, the trauma from the fire is in addition to this giant well of pain and unresolved trauma that takes maybe lifetimes and maybe generations to heal. It's not only Kanaka Maoli in Hawaii who are traumatized by the settler government. Of course, we have our Filipino community who are largely oppressed by the labor that they give for the tourism and the medical industry at low wages. Not to mention, in the Philippines, they have hundreds of years longer of occupation than we had here in Hawaii. They have about 500 years. And they lost millions of their people to settler colonialism in the Philippines. Our Micronesian community suffered at the hands of the US government doing nuclear bombing. There are still generations later children being born with birth defects because of what the United States did to their islands. We have our undocumented community, which, yes, thanks to groups like Roots Reborn and so many of the other advocates are finally starting to have a voice in our community. But I showed up recently on top to people who are already traumatized for generations, and then you add a fire, a natural disaster, and then ICE is gonna come. Then we have our unsheltered. I didn't even remember to put the unsheltered on here, but I work with the unsheltered every day, who still, many of them are being moved around in the system and struggling and have no place to go. Many of whom are Kanaka Maoli, have continually been swept off of our own lands. And it got even worse after the fires. Sorry, I didn't say this was gonna be fun. But here's the good part. The people must respond and malama each other, take care of each other. We keep us safe. Of all of the struggles that we go through and that I've seen since the fires, the one thing that has given me hope is the way our community came together and the way people stepped up, the way the grassroots organizations stepped up. It wasn't even a question of like, should we? It was just like, we're going, get out of my way. And in many cases, we had to fight the powers that be to do that. We couldn't get through the blockade the first day, and then we had to call all of our friends in the mayor's office and then over here and over who knows who at the National Guard and whatever, so we could get permission to access, so we could get there. We tried to go the day after, we couldn't get in. We've been out there since the fire was Tuesday, Wednesday. We've been out there since the Thursday. But the grassroots organizations are really the source of life and the source of community care for the people. Because the government organizations are gonna come and go. And who's gonna be left? We are. A little bit about us, and then I'm gonna go back to the government. So we responded immediately. We moved at the speed of trust in our community, which means we didn't insert ourselves without permission and without talking to the people in those spaces and making sure they wanted us there. And the spaces where they were like, no, we're good, we left. But we were still in between 8 and 12 hubs at any given time. Our main hub was Honokawai Beach Park, but we stayed in all the hubs. We addressed mind, body, and spirit in culturally relevant ways. So we've had since the fires in the first few months close to 800 volunteers. And we had doctors, nurse practitioners, chiropractors, acupuncturists, naturopathic doctors, mental health professionals, people from every healing modality you can imagine. And we integrated it on site, in the parks, in the hubs. So we could do warm handoffs and check someone's blood pressure and then get them on the table for acupuncture to bring it down. Especially since we didn't have a lot of medicine in the beginning, and we were working with MauiWES pharmacy, running back and forth, trying to get people's meds filled, and it was pretty chaotic. But that is all to say, now we have a full-time clinic that's running 7 days a week at the state facility, and we run 7 days a week. We've got acupuncture, massage, lomi lomi, Chinese herbs, Hawaiian herbs, we have 3 hyperbaric oxygen chamber machines, including an ADA one that we can put families in. And we're a space that's like a pu'uhonua or a respite for people, so that when they're struggling and there's nowhere to go, they know they can come find us. And we've been there and we're consistent. When we were at Royal Lahaina, after we shut down the hub in the other hubs in December last year, Royal Lahaina at the time was the only hotel that only had fire survivors, and it worked out really, really well because they could just stumble down from their room in their pajamas if they were having a hard time, or they could call us and we would just go upstairs and provide service and just provide comfort, just be there to see them, to recognize them, to witness them, and let them know that they weren't alone in this. I wanted to put this picture up here, especially because I've been, harping on the US government because of the illegal occupation, and FEMA and Red Cross for us were a nightmare, a disaster, and very difficult to work with. They made our jobs harder. We had to put extra resources towards trying to navigate them out of our way, and they were harming our community and are still harming our community. With all that said, the relationships that Maui Medics created with people in government, like Heidi, who you're going to hear from next, and Amy, and Dr. Pang, and the boots on the ground people from the government, I want to just be clear that I'm separating those two things. Just because you work for the government doesn't mean, I'm not saying that I think that you're a bad person or that you're, doing the wrong thing, and, but you do have to be accountable to the community to use your time and space in there to push for the good of the people, which people like Dr. Pang and Amy and Heidi do. I mean, Heidi was pushing to get people's clinic up right away and had to, really push, because government is slow and full of red tape, and they want data and signatures and all kinds of stuff. But some of our local people that were working in there were able to push and make magic happen. And we all work together really well. So we can have these government grassroots coalitions, but it's more like people coalitions, and then we try to navigate around the government to figure out ways that we can best take care of our people without them getting in the way too much. So I'm just gonna show you some photos, almost pal. We're just gonna go through some pictures just to show you a little bit of what we did. This was early days. We would meet up. We had actually, our organization started on Mauna Kea we started organizing in 2017. We're really a street medic, frontline action organization, protecting sacred places and protecting Kanaka Maoli. And we had all this infrastructure already to bring in volunteers, so it was super easy when the fires happened. Everybody knew where to go. We put an app up with instructions, and we were able to get people in. Plenty of people from off-island wanted to volunteer with the Red Cross, and the Red Cross was not receiving off-island volunteers. They were receiving volunteers from the continent. So they were spending ridiculous amounts of money flying people here from, I kid you not, Nebraska, Iowa, the East Coast, and they were putting them up in hotels like this one, which are very expensive, and the people from the outer islands were being told, we don't need you. So they all came and they volunteered through us, which was amazing. Most of the Red Cross medical volunteers who had previously been with them came in through us. This is us in the beginning with our first little tent. We finally upgraded to a bigger tent and got an actual sign. These are some of my sisters on the front lines. These are all Indigenous women. This is with some of our fire folks and the, what do you call that thing that we used to sit in every day at the EOC, the emergency management people. This is us when we prep for reentry, which is one of the, reentry was one of the tasks that we had that we did with Healthy Babies, Healthy Mothers, and Department of Health. I wanted to put these pictures up just because when the fire burned everything down, it gave us different perspectives on our landscape. It allowed us to see things that we hadn't seen from these perspectives for a really long time because buildings were in the way. This is a kalo that I think I took this like a week after the fire that started popping up on in the burn zone. That was just a symbol that life can come back and life will return. This is us with Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies, prepping. So we went in for reentry every day in full PPE, and we educated the community on the importance of wearing PPE because the county's position was that PPE would be optional. Mind you, at this point, the soil had not been tested yet when reentry started. And there were people going in their flip-flops, I mean, my own family included in the beginning, in flip-flops and swim shorts and no shirts in the burn zone. And the county did very little to educate folks about the danger. So Dr. Peng and Heidi and some of us other folks were working really hard to make sure that the community actually had the education to make an informed decision about whether or not they were going to wear PPE. And we rode around on little golf courts with upgraded PPE and tried to get everybody to wear the chemical resistant gloves and wear the booties that didn't break and wear the goggles that actually covered the side of your eye. You know, and we had ice packs and cold packs and just tried to take care of the people while they were going back and grieving their losses. We did trainings and talk story circles that were culturally relevant. There's some people in this room I see that were in some of these trainings. Fresh out of Aloha, this was from the Lahaina Strong stance at the beach. We've got some Lahaina Strong folks here today. You know, it was really, really painful to see our people living on the beach when all of these tourists are staying in these fancy hotels. These hotels, which this one included, by the way, dug up our ancestors in order to be built here. We still hold, this is a La'au class, Hawaiian herbology, to train our community and some of our patients and fire survivors how to make medicine. This is our community acupuncture clinic, which we run a few days a week where we can treat multiple people, particularly using an ear treatment that is used a lot with military veterans and as a detox protocol for PTSD. And everything in our clinic is free. Nobody pays anything. And here's two kupuna just sitting on the couch. They come in regularly just to talk story. So they need a place to go, to be, to hang out. And then we're also doing some trainings. The Kia'i Kaya Ulu was a training we did on Oahu recently about community accountability. We're doing an identity as medicine training, and then we're doing a healing justice training concurrently right now that we're working on to make sure that in our efforts and our movements to make political change and social change that we are addressing our trauma and that we are taking care of one another and being accountable and preventing burnout by actually doing our work on our trauma, because so many of us are exhausted and burnt out, and not just disaster recovery, but movements in general takes its toll on people, and oftentimes the movements fail because there's no protocols in place for that and for accountability. So we're working very hard from the ground up to build systems so that we can be in our communities and we can share these things with our communities, because at the end of the day, recovery is going to look like communities of care. Recovery is going to look like the ways in which we aloha one another. It's going to look like the ways that we build relationships that we don't walk away from, and the ways that we take care of our land and our people and each other. Thank you so much for your time today. It was really great to be here. Aloha.